and I'm so grateful to have Governor Weld here to my left, which is unique, but here we are. Town Hall. My name is William Lessig. I'm the founder of Equal Citizens. There's an extraordinary list of people who helped make this possible, including Open Democracy Action, Equal Citizens, New Hampshire Independent Voters, New Hampshire Labor News, Fair Vote, New Hampshire Ranked Choice Voting. Thanks in America, we only have to Committee for Ranked Choice Voting, New Hampshire Voters Restoring Democracy, Stampede, American Promise, New Action, New Hampshire Fair Vote, Take Back Our Republic, whose founder is also here, John Putnam. It's wonderful to see you here, John. Protect Democracy and Common Cause. So everybody sends at least one person, which
sounds like a majority.
Yes. It is such an honor to be able to have this conversation with Governor Weld. I was told that I was supposed to pass it to him to introduce himself. That felt like they were either dissing me or dissing him. I didn't know which was. So I'm not going to allow you complete freedom to introduce yourself. I want to set it up a bit and then ask you to add to what I might have missed. You know, I've known Governor Weld for a long time just because I teach at this law school down south, where he graduated. That's in Cambridge. But Governor Weld has been important not just to the law school, but to the law and to our democracy. So I want to think about three stages in that. The first was Governor Weld as the anti-corruption fighter. So he left law school and went to work with Hillary Rodham on the committee that was impeaching President Nixon. And we just discovered he worked with my uncle when he did that. And then he became a U.S. attorney in Massachusetts, and he aggressively pursued anti-corruption cases against the one-party system that is Massachusetts, even though the one party happened to be my party, and was successful in rooting out corruption in that context. He then became head of the criminal division in the Justice Department, and as a matter of principle, found himself in a position where he had to resign because of his belief that they were not sufficiently pursuing proper ethical standards with Attorney General Meese. And that act of principle brought him back to Massachusetts, which is where he entered the second stage, becoming governor. And of course, when he was elected in 1990, he was the first Republican elected governor in Massachusetts since 1975. He was re-elected with 71% of the vote, which made him the victor of the largest lopsided victory in the history of Massachusetts government. And of course, that was because he became an incredibly popular governor, though a Republican in an overwhelmingly Democratic state. And that was a popularity earned through answering what people in Massachusetts felt like they needed, which was a more responsive government to making a prosperity in Massachusetts happen. And then he's into the third stage, which has been this interesting struggle of principle, I think, inside of and sometimes outside of the Republican Party. He was, at the end of his term as governor, nominated by President Clinton to be ambassador to Mexico, only to find his nomination blocked by the then chairman of the relevant committee, Senator Helms. People might not remember Helms, but he was a pretty extreme Republican. He didn't think that a Republican, even though a Republican nominated by a Democrat like Weld should be able to serve. And from that point on, I have taken inspiration from your willingness to stand strong for a certain set of principles that define a character, a kind of character for the Republican Party. And it inspires me to this day, which led me to say to my team, we have to have a conversation with Governor Weld about democracy reform. Because if there's one issue that we all should be able to agree upon, it is democracy reform. And so I'm so grateful that you would agree to take this up with us. And if I fail to include any important facts in your past, I invite you back.
Thank you very much, Barry. I'm going to add just two things. Is this carrying? No? So, factoid number one that I wish to add is I not only hold the record for the most lopsided margin of victory in Massachusetts, I hold also the record for the most lopsided margin of defeat. At age 32, knowing nothing and nobody, I challenged Francis X. Bellotti, Attorney General of Massachusetts, and I was defeated by a margin of 79 to 21. That's larger than 71 to 29 the other direction. The other point, which I think is directly relevant today, in 1996, as a sitting governor, I challenged the sitting United States Senator John Kerry for his Senate seat, and we were same class at college. She was Yale, I was Harvard, but we knew each other quite well, and it was
See, I came to the mic, which is very good.
So anyway, Senator Kerry and I were both at the height of our powers, 75% favorability, and we started off, it was the marquee Senate race of that year. And we were going along, and it was obvious that each of us could have raised $25 million for that campaign, which doesn't sound like much these days, but it was a ton for those days. And we both had the same idea, which is, do we really want to spend 2/3 of our time fundraising for the balance of this campaign? Because there's so many interesting issues and things to do. So we charged our respective staffs with working out a deal to limit the amount of expenditures in the race. So my campaign manager, Steve Buckingham, called up his campaign manager, John Martilla, and each of them thought that this was a trap by the other side. And each of them knew that their man could raise $25 million and was being somehow cozened out of this. So they were unable to make any progress whatsoever. So I call up the senator and I say, John, maybe you and I should just have a chat. And he said, well, I'm actually in Boston. Why don't you traipse on over to Lewisburg Square and maybe we can iron something out. So I walked over to his townhouse in Lewisburg Square on Beacon Hill in Boston, and in 15 minutes we went bang, 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 and worked out a deal where we agreed to limit spending to $8 million instead of $25 million, and we were both at $8 million already. And I'm not aware that that's been done since, but it was a good idea at the time, and he and I wrote more than one op-ed in the New York Times and other outlets about that and how easy it was to prod others to do it. And it hasn't been done, which just shows you how intoxicating money is. That's my other vignette.
Okay, so that's wonderful compliments, because I think both of you together point to the subject that we want to talk about today. So the strategy for our conversation at this town hall will be, I'm going to ask the governor a series of questions that kind of maps through the issues that we've been talking about and rallying people around. Everyone should have access to a card, a white index card, where you can ask questions, which will then, I will then ask the governor. The charge of this town hall is to talk about democracy issues, and so what we're going to do is to focus on those questions that are talking about democracy-related issues. There are a million issues, obviously, we could be talking about, but we want to focus on the democracy issues. So halfway through, we'll collect these cards, and then I'll direct our questions. Okay, so we at Equal Citizens have been looking at all of the candidates running for president, and we've been grading them. I'm a law professor, so this is what I write naturally. And some candidates have A pluses. We don't have an A plus yet, Governor. And so my objective here is to work through these questions so we can get you into the high A's on this part. Because I can't really believe that there's a principled reason why we can't agree on most of the important issues. So let's start with the one that I know we agree on, which is ranked choice voting. So people here, I'm sure, know about ranked choice voting. The basic idea behind ranked choice voting is that you give voters a chance to express themselves more than just the simple assertion, I want to vote for A or I want to vote for B. So you say, give us your first choice, give us your second choice, maybe give us your third choice. If the first choice doesn't win, then we look at your second choice vote. And then we cast your second choice vote. If your second choice vote doesn't get 50%, then we do the third choice vote and so on. So Maine has adopted this for the 2020 presidential election, which means if there are third-party candidates, or two third-party candidates, as some people worry, then your first vote can go for that third-party candidate, and then if that third-party candidate doesn't win, the second vote goes for second place. You've been supporting something like this for a while.
Yes, I've voted in Cambridge, Mass. for 25 years, and they have something called proportional representation, which is very similar. And it was dispositive in many elections. It was a 9-member city council in Cambridge, and there were 4 hidebound conservatives and 4 ultra-liberals and a swing vote. And I remember voting for my friend and neighbor Alice Wolf and a bunch of the conservatives, and you really can have an impact there. And also bullet voting was important there. One way if you want to maximize the impact of not vote. I campaigned long and hard in the great state of Maine in 2016 for equal choice voting because I was on the libertarian ticket, and I think ranked choice voting will reward the intensity, among other things. We were successful, and in the 2018 election, I believe that that decided the election. It went to the Democrat over the Republican, when the second choice was counted. And Professor Lessig reminded me of the most dramatic example of the application of ranked choice voting would have been in Florida in the 2000 presidential election. Ralph Nader had XTX votes that would all have gone obviously to Al Gore. Ralph Nader really did tip the 2000 election.
I will think about it.
Just as Jim Romney might have tipped the 2016 election.
Right, but to make sure you don't get in too much trouble with Republican friends here, let's be clear, in 2018 it's true, there was one election that was determined by ranked choice in Maine, and it shifted from the Republican to the Democrat. There are 2 important points about that. Number one, that Republican said, I don't want your second choice vote, I want you only your first choice vote. So you didn't really even compete under the ranked choice system. And the second thing is, I've done a study of elections across the country. A clear majority, if there had been ranked choice, of the ones that would have been decided by ranked choice would have gone Republican. So this is not a democratic scheme. In fact, Utah, the leader of the New Hampshire ranked choice independent voting system is a former Utah Republican, and in Utah, Republicans have used ranked choice forever to decide issues. So this is a pure issue of democracy, and again, this is why I think we should be able to have an agreement on this. So this is easy step 1. So now I'm going to make a series of mistakes which a good lawyer would never make, which is to ask questions, the answer to which I don't know. So here, let's start with gerrymandering. So tell us how you think about the problem of gerrymandering, what you think we should be doing to solve it.
I think we should have independent commissions drawing the line. I participated in this as a governor in 1992, and I can tell you that there's one thing that legislators were terrified of, and that's having the thing wind up at a court, because the court might have an independent judgment, and that led me to think that we probably did need an independent. But I think an independent commission is probably superior to having it be decided judicially, vesting all that in one person. Allows lots of different ideas to filter in. But that's the way of the future. I'm a little bit gloomy. Seems to me there was a recent case in the U.S. Supreme Court almost declaring that gerrymandering is a political issue in which the court should not wade too deeply. That's not a good. And that was Roberts, wasn't it? That's right. Yeah. That makes me very worried because I think Roberts was well better in the court.
Well, it's clear the court has basically said we're not going to have anything to do with it. But what's interesting is there's a number of bills in Congress exercising Congress's Article 1, Section 4 power. You remember that from law school, I'm sure. That would give Congress the ability to tell states that at least when they draw congressional lines, they have to use a process which is not partisan driven. So you could, through Congress, achieve this, even if the states don't get around to doing it, at least for congressional seats, which I think you would agree would be an enormous step forward. All right, so see, number 2, gerrymandering. We have an agreement on gerrymandering. Here's number 3, where I think I know where you are, because I know that you're in a lawsuit involved in this. The Electoral College. So, you know, as a Republican from Massachusetts, the experience of being a Republican from Massachusetts is to show up and vote, and to never have your vote matter. Because Massachusetts is a state, like 48 states, which allocates their electors in a winner-take-all way. Which means the winner of the popular vote gets all of the electoral votes. And what that means is the only states that matter to a presidential candidate in the general election are the so-called swing states. So in 2016, 99% of presidential spending was in 14 states. And those 14 states are not small states, they're not rural states. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Florida. Those are not small states. But they decide, they choose our president, and they don't happen to represent America. So we've been talking a long time as a nation about how we could reform the system. You're involved in a case, which I helped instigate, I don't want to pretend that we're unbelieved in this, that is trying to get the court to say, as a matter of equal protection, you should at least allocate electors proportionally, so that if you're a Republican and you vote like a million did in Massachusetts for the Republican candidate, you at least ought to have some electors to reward you for that vote. I take it you're still on board with this.
Yeah, no, I'm a named plaintiff in a suit of which Professor Lessig is the intellectual godfather, and I'm one of 2 plaintiffs in Massachusetts, and we filed in 4 states simultaneously. We also filed in Texas, and one in a red state. And in Texas, of course, the plaintiff is the Democrat saying, I don't get any representation. And there is, I was just saying to the professor earlier, that there's a 1968 U.S. Supreme Court case, an opinion written by Hugo Black, one of my favorite Supreme Court justices, saying that, of course, the states can do whatever they want in terms of allocating their electors to the courts, at least affect that they're giving wide berth to the political process here. And they really don't want to wade too deeply into it. And then he said, he adds, Justice Black adds, as long as they don't violate any constitutional provision, any federal constitutional rules like due process and equal protection. And it seems to me that you could make a pretty good argument that having private equal protection and not having any representation whatsoever. And update us on where that policy stands. To that extent, yeah, I'm for tearing down the temple wall. I'm not sure I'm ever going to get an A+ because I've not come out and said that the Electoral College should be altogether abolished. You know, there was a grand bargain back in Philadelphia in 1787, and little states got 2 senators apiece, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and that, you know, it's in the Constitution, so that in itself is not a violation of equal protection. But it does mean that the little states get a lot more attention than they otherwise would, just on the basis of population. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing.
Yeah, so there might be other graders who would hold that against you. I'm not going to hold that against you here. In fact, you know, I think if you think about what practically is feasible, whether the court agrees with us or not, what about an amendment that said, let's allocate proportionally, but at a fractional level? So you could get out of Montana as a Democrat 1.4427 electoral votes. But if you do it at a fractional level, that really does make every state in play. It matters, it doesn't matter whether you're going to vote from Texas or New York or Montana or California, that helps you get elected president. So the president would really run in the whole country. But I would be willing to accept, if we had that as part of the bargain, keeping the number of electors as they are right now. So Montana gets 3 electors, even though the population, I mean, Wyoming gets 3 electors, even though the population of Wyoming shouldn't entitle them to 1 congressional representation because it's like 400,000 or something like that. So,
yeah,
so
no, I would go with you on that. I think the other reason why I think I'm not going to give an A+ is because I would not be in favor of direct popular election of the president, because then the candidates really are going to go only to New York and California, and nobody will ever go to Montana.
Okay, so I can tell you who you should not take a class with if you want to avoid that and punish for that. But I'm not going to punish you for that. I'm not going to hold it against you because.
What are you, a centrist?
Yeah, well, okay. this is on Facebook. Don't want to get in trouble. Okay, so all right, we've got ranked choice voting, we've got gerrymandering, we've got electoral college reform. Again, I can't understand why we disagree about the next one either, voting rights or the suppression of votes.
Oh my goodness.
What's interesting about this is often framed, and for good reason, as being an issue about race. So you look at Georgia and you look at the efforts taken to exclude people from voting in Georgia, and it looks like it's white people trying to exclude black people, and I don't have any doubt that that's part of what it is. But the more fundamental second reason, it seems to me, has got to be politics. It's got to be Republicans trying to make it harder for Democrats to vote. Or you understand in Massachusetts that it might be the case that sometimes Democrats want to make it harder for Republicans to vote, right? So it seems to me there can't be a real disagreement about trying to make sure that we have equal freedom to vote.
After he'd been paid cash money by Christy Woodman when she was running for re-election in New Jersey, which would have had to be 1997, that his job was to suppress voter turnout in minority areas by, he came pretty close to saying paying money to the black pastors to suppress turnout there. And why he didn't go right to jail, I have no idea. But it's not just Republicans in the South, it's Republicans in the North as well. There's an effort in New Hampshire, I think it was the governor or recently to say, okay, all you students who drive your car here, or if it's your parents' car and it's registered in Tennessee instead of New Hampshire, you can't vote here. Well, that goes against the normal residence rules for voting. It's just an effort to have fewer students vote. I'm trying to do the opposite in New Hampshire, and the state party and the party leaders in New Hampshire, as in the other 49 states, are totally against me because they are the Trump organization in each of the 50 states, and they're appointed and compensated currently by the Trump organization with the National Police. So they won't have anything to do with me. So I've decided that my strategy in New Hampshire and elsewhere is to try to enlarge the electorate that will participate in the Republican Party, which means, among other things, that I concentrate my focus, at least, on the 20 states that do permit so-called crossover voting, in which people who are not registered Republican can vote in the Republican primary. And in 17 of those 20, including Vermont, the Democrat can simply take the Republican ballot. You just walk in and you don't even have registration in advance to take whatever ballot you want in the primary. So within the last 2 weeks, we paid for my campaign for president, paid for ads in the New Hampshire newspapers saying, okay, here's a memo to Democrats, Republicans, and undeclared, which is what independents are called in New Hampshire. Anybody can vote in either primary. P.S. to Democrats, who were actually the true intended recipients of this message.
I don't think you're supposed to say that, but okay.
It was obvious enough. If you would like to vote for a Republican primary, you have to do so by October 25th, which is the deadline under the Secretary of State Gardner's ruling. And that was so that they would not let that date fly by. And I will say that I've gotten in the field great response from Democrats to the notion that if they wanted to go in and cast a vote against Mr. Trump early, that they would know would come out of his pocket, do it for me in the Republican primary, and then you can go back and take a long hot shower and with lots of soap and come back to being a Democrat and vote for the Democrat in Ohio. What I want now is that vote in the primary. And actually, the more liberal the Democrat, the greater the traction. Because they would say, not only is that a great idea, am I going to do it, but everybody in my family's going to do it, and everybody will know, yada, yada, yada. So, enlarging the electorate is at the core of my campaign and the basis for my campaign, to get away from the Republican, we don't want the primaries, we don't want a general election, we want our man to be a monarch. So that's why I say I might need to be ahead of the curve.
Well, I'm happy to take your lead and follow you wherever you're going to go on this, because I agree with you, it's fundamental. And it's astonishing how insiders like the system where they can suppress the number of people participating and the number of people voting, because they know where they're going to be, the people who show up regularly, and they know how to talk to them. But we got to have a system where everybody feels like they can participate and want to participate. And so I commend this effort, because I think the more people in New Hampshire participate, the better the result will be.
Let me say one other thing. So part of my pitch is to younger voters, to millennials and Gen Xers, and I argue that two of my top issues are not having $1 trillion deficit every year, and I know how to make that happen. And I say to the younger voters, you are going to never see Social Security if this keeps up. It's a national security matter, but also you individually are going to be hurt by this. Same for climate change. If we allow the polar ice cap to melt, it's not my generation that's going to see the seacoast rearranged. It's their generation, and they're going to get that atrocious, much more severe weather systems and storms than we've ever seen before. And we've already had a taste of that just in the last 10 years or so, but it's going to get apocalyptically worse than that. And many lesser developed nations are not going to be able to support their populations because of flooding and extreme weather, and they won't be able to generate enough food to feed their populations. So this polar ice cap melting is really a planetary disaster. And again, it's the younger people who are going to bear the brunt of that.
Okay, so I want to turn to the place where typically we find some resistance, although again, I have no reason to believe that you're going to find it here. We all recognize, especially people who come out because of the organizations that have helped put this event together, the outsized role of money in politics. And sometimes you want to think about that because you think, oh, people are spending a lot of money. The way I like to think about it as a problem is just the amount of time people have to spend raising money. So members of Congress spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time dialing for dollars. And of course, they're not dialing for dollars from the average American, they're dialing for dollars from the tiniest fraction of the 1%. So they bend over backwards to make those people happy to get their money. And is it any surprise that when they then show up to vote on the floor of Congress, they have to keep them happy by voting in a particular way? There's an astonishing moment in the lead up to the passage of the $1.6 trillion tax cut that Donald Trump and the Republicans passed in the House. One member from New York stood on the floor of the House and he said, "My donors have told me that if I don't pass this, I should never talk to them again." And so there was the clearest signal that this is about keeping your donors happy, not what's good for Americans. So the way we've been talking about how to solve this problem is how do we change the way campaigns are funded? So people feel independent of a tiny, tiny group who fund their campaigns and more responsive to ordinary voters. So how would you solve that problem?
Well, I think we should not have anonymous contributions. We shouldn't have unlimited contributions, both of which we have right now. I think reasonable limits on the size of contributions are constitutional and a good idea. I'm not sure I think they should be $100. I think they should be maybe a little bit more than that, but not $100,000, and really not $25,000 either. The limit now in a presidential race is $2,800 per person. I don't think that's out of control. And people certainly watch like hawks. What's the average contribution? And if it's something like $7.75, that's considered a very good thing. I wish I could say mine is that low, but it's not. But it's not. It's cheaper.
Okay, but we can distinguish between a presidential race and Congress. And I actually think those are really important differences there, because the presidential race can inspire all sorts of exciting small donor contributions. But you're not going to have a Congress that's independent of money merely by having people promise to take the money $25,000. You're going to have to change the way they can fund their campaigns. So one idea that's been advanced, one of my favorite books describing it, other than my own, but one of the favorite books describing it by one of the co-founders of the Take Back Our Republic project, is a book by Richard Painter, who was George Bush's epic czar. And what he calls for are what he calls democracy vouchers, where everybody gets a voucher that they can use to help fund the congressional campaign. So let's imagine that like the first $100, or he actually said $200. The first $200 of your taxes that you send to the federal government will send back to you in the form of a voucher. And you can use that to help fund congressional campaigns. So congressional campaigns would be extremely interested to talk to everybody to help get the vouchers from everybody, rather than the tiny few who right now write the checks for $2,800. So is there a reason in principle that you would oppose something like that?
No, that sounds fine.
That sounds fine. Does that sound good? Okay, you're getting very high number. I told you we'd get into this. Okay, so we've got renters voting, gerrymandering, electoral college voting. It's not just people who are retired. You guys vote for everybody who should be. That's an incredibly important addition. Okay, we've got all of these things that are fundamental parts of agreement. Here's the final push, and then we're going to take questions. So please, let somebody collect these questions.
Yeah.
So Olivia will be collecting questions and we'll go through those questions. So for many of us who identified these dimensions of reform as pretty important and necessary to make so we can have a government that works again, it seems to also follow that we need to push this reform right at the start, right? Day one reform. And it's a way to make credible that one is a believer in reform. You need to talk about whether to move it right away. So, you know, people like Vice President Biden have talked about reform, but he's not yet made a commitment that this would be something he really would be a priority of his. Mayor Buttigieg has said reform is fundamental, but he would make it a priority. So I wonder whether, now that you identified these issues that qualify you as an A candidate on reform, whether there's a commitment also that you believe that we need to move reform as a priority so that the other things that you want to do, which I think are equally important, for example, dealing with the deficit and especially through addressing the problem of the United States military, are even possible. So is this a priority for you?
It's a good idea, and you can write it all down in advance, and then if you get elected, you don't have to spend a lot of time in the first 3 days. It'll self-trigger. So yeah, I'd be all for that.
Okay, so I got a new book where it's all written down, and I've got a copy of it. Send that to Congress, so we have it. Okay, so I think we need to take a moment to celebrate something that the public is not generally aware of, and certainly the media never talks about. You know, we are a divided nation, they tell us. Right? But here's the reality. On this issue, we're not a divided nation. On this issue, we should be able to find common ground. And of course, Governor Weld is a uniquely extraordinary candidate, and so I think we're honored to be able to have this conversation with the Republican first, with Governor Weld. But can we just acknowledge how wonderful it is, maybe through some applause for how extraordinary it is? Okay, so with that, I'm going to choose some questions from the audience. Adam. Okay, let's start, and I'm going to order these a little bit, but so if somebody wants to dig down a little bit on voting protection, would you restore the Voting Rights Act?
The Voting Rights Act is 1965?
The 65, so in the United States has dealt a pretty significant blow to the Voting Rights Act. And the big push right now is to restore critical parts of the Voting Rights Act. And make sure it
To where it was. Yeah, no, I could do that. I'm not sure I can recite for you every single clause.
I'm glad you can't. Okay, so yes, we will
And by the
restore.
way, you're not going to get everybody in the country agreeing on all this stuff, because there are people in the Republican Party who, if they could restore a poll tax in the South, they'd be delighted to do so.
Yeah, but here's the question. Don't you think that among voters, we should be able to get 70%?
Ordinary people.
Ordinary people, absolutely. So that's where reform has happened. It's from the bottom up. 2018 had more referenda addressing fundamental reform pass in the nation than at any moment in American history, because all Americans are frustrated with this right now. So that's all I'm talking about. I don't care about Washington people. That's not. Okay, so how about Jim Crow felon disenfranchisement? So an example of this reform was Florida, which in the last election, 61% of people voted to end disenfranchisement by felons. 61% means that that's a state where no more than 50% voted for a Democrat. So that means that Democrats, Republicans, and Independents voted to end felon disenfranchisement. What's your position on laws like that?
Well, I'm fine with felons having the right to vote restored after they paid their debt to society, and I'd be willing to consider for people still serving their sentence, i.e. still incarcerated, different categories of felony, but for violent felonies while still incarcerated, it goes down a little harder.
Okay, so that once they serve their time.
Oh, no problem.
Okay. Does your campaign use bundlers? That's an interesting question.
No, I wish
So here's a great question. What would you say is the significance of your campaign for the long-term health of the Republican Party, and I would say therefore the country, just as the country?
Well, I have a position, which is that the United States is never going to be able to breathe a sigh of relief unless the Senate, after the Trump case comes over from the House, unless the Senate actually votes to remove the president. Under the Constitution, if the president is removed, as you know, impeachment is solely a remedial clause in the Constitution to get people out of office. And under that provision, anyone who is removed by the Senate can never again in their lifetime hold an office of honor or profit under the laws of the United States. So there would be no clawing back from the crypts. Trump in 2024, let's see if we can't keep dividing the country and getting his teeth on edge and stirring resentment and fury and hatred and fear, which is the current program of the White House. If that happens, I've said that I think the future of the Republican Party will be as it was before Mr. Trump. It will be like, boy, was that, did that actually happen, or was that a bad dream? And I likened it to, if you've ever been on a ship at sea with a bad storm for a couple of days, particularly a small one, and then you wake up one morning and all is calm, you think something's different. What is it? I know, no more wind. If that happened with the bloodless removal of Mr. Trump, who, by the way, has threatened a civil war, quote unquote, his words, not mine, if he's not reelected in 2020. So he's not exactly helping this situation. So let's say that doesn't happen, and let's say he wants the Republicans in the Senate to walk the plank, and let's say they do walk the plank and sing his song instead of their own. They're all going to get defeated, and so the Republicans will lose the Senate right away. I think the party is likely to divide in half or disappear. And I've likened it to what happened with the Whig Party, with the predecessor to the Republican Party in the 1850s. It broke up over the issue of slavery, and one half was called the Know-Nothings. And they were founded on anti-immigrant fervor. They hated all the Catholics coming in from Ireland and Germany and Italy. And they held violent rallies, and they were much given to conspiracy theories, and their lineal ancestors at the Trump faction in the Republican Party now. And the other half of the Whig Party, the northern half, the nice people, if you will, they joined John C. Fremont in 1856 in that election, and it was the Free Soil Party, and they became the Republican Party shortly thereafter, and they elected Abraham Lincoln president of the United States in 1860. So that was a happy ending. But I see the party splitting up if Trump has not been moved by the Senate.
So if it splits up, I mean, I'm not a Republican. I was for a long time. I was the youngest member of the 1980 delegation from Pennsylvania for Ronald Reagan. But I do believe, even as a Democrat, it's extremely important to have a healthy Republican Party.
It doesn't have to be the Republican Party. It can be the Libertarian Party.
Okay.
It can be the Unity Party, the Liberty Party. I mean, I'm a guy who ran as a candidate for a third party. In fact, our platform was that the two parties in Washington, D.C. are locked in a death spiral embrace. It's an embrace because they need each other to terrify their own base into giving them enough money so they can get reelected, which is all they care about, which I don't get. I was national chairman of U.S. term limits, so I'm kind of on the other side of that trade, as they say in Wall Street. Our platform was that they're not getting the people's business done, and I think that's true to this day. I have a lot less use for the two-party system.
So does that mean you think we should have 3 or more than 2?
Well, the argument against that is France, Fifth Republic, 26 parties, banana republic, so-called. But I think the current system is sufficiently poisonous so that I'd like to see a third party come on the scene in a meaningful way. And Gary Johnson and I almost got there. If we'd gotten 5%, we would have been classed to start the party, and I would have all kinds of 4.5 million votes.
Yeah, and so you were also excluded from the debates by a commission that is basically run by the two parties to
Not
keep.
basically.
It is run by the two parties, right, to keep third parties out. So that's part of this corrupting.
Right. And Mike Bloomberg has said that commission on debates should be abolished, and I strongly agree.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, there's litigation to try to do exactly that, but it is embedding this two-party system. But then, so that leads to one of the questions that I didn't want to ask, but now I guess I'll ask. So if the Republican Party lines up lockstep behind the sinking ship called Donald Trump, does that mean you need to do another third-party run?
No, I ruled out a third-party run on this cycle, and certainly this is my last cycle. So I wouldn't do that. If Trump is the nominee, I want to be very sure I was doing everything I could to defeat Trump. I've said that under no circumstances would I ever support Donald Trump for any office whatsoever. So I think whether that would be best served by supporting a libertarian nominee, supporting the Democrats, supporting hypothetically Mike Bloomberg if he runs as a third party, or a new party. I was supporting the best chance.
When you were running as a third-party candidate, it must have felt frustrating that it wasn't easier to convince people to step away from the Republican Party.
We thought we had a 6-lane highway right up the middle, because we were the only party that was fiscally responsible, fiscally conservative, and socially liberal, and welcoming or open to those adjectives you want to use. And that doesn't really characterize either of the other parties, because the Democrats seem to be trying to outdo each other in how much money they can pledge to spend on, you name it, education, climate change. Sanders is the best climate change proposal, because he's going to spend $16.3 trillion. Poor Joe Biden is bringing up the rear because he has only $1.6 trillion. And their proposals often are described only in terms of the amount of money they're going to spend on the imperative, whatever the imperative would be. And that's a pro I'll have to pick for the Democrats if I get to that point.
Okay, so the push then for party change is strategic to the end of making sure that we don't re-elect Donald Trump. I understand that. The fundamental policy change to make sure we're healthy politics is the part that's more important to me right now. You said right now, I want to make sure one of the questions clarifies that. The question is, Massachusetts voters passed public financing of elections in 1996 by referendum, but the Democratic Speaker refused to fund it. And the question is, do you support public funding of federal elections? The version of vouchers that I was describing is a kind of public funding. It's bottom-up public funding, not top-down public funding.
And that's the exclusive route for funding of elections?
It doesn't have to be. No.
If it's not exclusive, then I'm all for it, because it gives the little candidate, the startup candidate, a chance to get on the playing field and be heard.
Yeah, okay. All right, so that I should do this. I'll move that way. Here's another question: would you support federal legislation limiting the purging of voters through state systems to purge voters from the voting polls?
Purge on what basis?
Well, the system has now identified voters who have not voted enough, or they've identified voters they think are registered in more than one district. And of course, the technologies for doing that are unsurprisingly very crude. So they will look at the first name and last name, and if they match the first name and last names, then they say you're obviously registered to vote in more than one place, or you're very off everywhere. Or, one example that's talked about is a really wonderful book by Carol Anderson called, well, she's got two of them, I can't remember which book this one's in, but she talks about how, if you've got a name that has a hyphen on your registration card, you don't use a hyphen, but in your driver's license you do use a hyphen, that's the voter fraud, and so therefore you're thrown off there too. So these are all techniques to avoid allowing people to vote. It sounds like from what you said before, you're not for these techniques.
No, that's correct. Purge is not a good word. And I can well imagine that in states where they want to limit voting and have voter suppression, they might vote.
Yeah. And then it follows from that, too, that you agree that statements Donald Trump has been making about voter fraud are not supported in...
Yeah, no, I mean, it's he's setting up for his civil war, for his the situation is rigged. When he loses, if he's on the ballot, and loses the 2020 election, he's already said in his speech on August 15th in New Hampshire, oh my God, in New Hampshire there was just thousands and thousands of fraudulent votes last time. Many, many fraudulent votes. I was robbed, there were lots of fraudulent votes. And what he's setting up to say is all those students who voted against him were voting fraudulently because they should have voted back in Pennsylvania. And Bill Gardner, the Secretary of State, immediately took the airwaves and said there was absolutely no evidence of any fraudulent voting whatsoever. But it's just part of his long-running effort to set up his claim that he really should have been elected president, even if he doesn't get there. And it's not a happy day for democracy when we have to start thinking about things, whether we're going to have to rely on the military to keep this guy from usurping the electoral system, even if he loses.
Yeah, so I agree. It's outrageous he would have used the reference to the Civil War. But, Obama said about a month ago, if you watch Fox News, you live in a different reality from people who read the New York Times. And, when you begin to think of what that implies, it does evoke this image of the way the world was before the Civil War. I mean, that was a time when, because of press restrictions, people in the South didn't even know what people in the North were saying. People in the North didn't know what people in the South were saying. So that was a time when we lived in two separate worlds, which of course meant that we couldn't even understand the same facts. As opposed to when you were working on the impeachment of President Nixon. The striking thing about the impeachment of President Nixon is that, for all of President Nixon's administration, he is loved by Republicans about the same number of Donald Trump, supported about 83, 84%. Then beginning 6 months before he resigns, the Republicans and the Democrats in lockstep start not liking him until at the moment he resigns, he's not liked by 50% of Republicans. But they're moving in lockstep because we're all hearing the same story. We're all confronting the same facts. And because we're all confronting the same facts, it's having an effect on all of us. But doesn't it frighten you that we now live in a world where there are Fox viewers who just don't know what anti-Trump people mean? They don't even understand why you wouldn't be for Trump. And those of us who are not for Trump, we can't begin to understand how to be for Trump. And that world makes it harder for us to go through something like an impeachment process than when you worked for the House. Isn't that?
That's right, but I think the uneducable, the people who don't have access to any information other than Fox News, I doubt that that's more than 25% of the electorate. And the fact that 51% of the electorate is in favor of the president being removed by the Senate, I was surprised the first time I heard that. And I do think that, let's see what the next few months brings. But if the House moves the matter over to the Senate, then, that's going to be massive waves of negative publicity for Mr. Trump. That it's going to be hard to drown out. And I wouldn't be surprised if that figure goes from 51% to 59%. And if that happens, the Republicans in the Senate who are going to be voting on the removal question, they're going to look to their own elections next year, and they can't get reelected just by the end of the time. They have to win the general election. And if they say that 60% are raised against them, they're going to vote to remove them.
Okay, but how many times have you been on Fox News to tell your side of the story?
I go on with Judge Napolitano and Neil Cavuto on Fox Business and Fox News recently. I've probably been on a dozen times of this cycle.
And on the main, Tucker Carlson?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And Sean Hannity used to think I was terrific when I first got elected because my name wasn't Michael S. Dukakis. He was in a Boston Reporter. But no, there's not a lot of overlap.
But do you think it's important that we create it? Should we begin saying to Fox News that they have a duty to the public to at least give their viewers a view of what another Republican looks like?
That'd be fine with me.
Okay, you want to vote with mobile devices. Here's a great question. What about that paper trail? Do we have to worry about making sure there's a paper trail backup or something like that?
No, I think we did electronic backup.
And you trust the electronic backup?
cybersecurity than we are doing, and that would be the electoral system as well as, of course, the grid and our infrastructure. And actually, defense and cybersecurity is offense. You have to make it more painful for the other side to acquire this information than it's worth to them.
So here's a simple paper backup for your idea. Like you vote, and immediately a letter goes out to you and to the voting office that says, here's a coded way to you to reference what you voted, and to the office the same thing. So there's a paper record, and if you get, it says that you voted for Donald Trump, you can say, hey, wait a minute, that was the Russians' view of my vote, not my view of my vote, and so you can then flag it. So there's a way we can add paper into your idea. What about voting at the age of 16, given you want so many more people to be in this election? 18. All right, that's interesting principle, given that I think at least if there's Republicans who are 16, they're likely to want to be voting for you over the president. Okay, so then let's talk finally. We just got a couple more minutes, and I think most of these questions have been in disposed of where we were. Okay, so back to the question of how we're going to deal with the money in politics. I promised you I was going to talk about this, so I'm breaking my promise, but I'm not running for anything, so I'm not going to get in trouble for this. So then, it's clear we got to do something about the Constitution if we're going to deal with the money in politics problem. I think you've been asked to sign something called the 28th Amendment, but we don't know exactly what the text of that is, so there's no commitment to sign the 28th Amendment. But would you, if the Supreme Court doesn't fix the mess they've created with Citizens United and the rest, would you support an amendment to try to at least eliminate these things called super PACs so that people can spend these huge amounts of money effectively?
No, I think I said right off the bat, unlimited and anonymous are two words that should not be in our vocabulary here. The reason that I do think a constitutional amendment is necessary is that the Supreme Court and Citizens United in 2010 put that on constitutional grounds.
Yes.
So I'd be in favor of either a 28th Amendment, we now have 27, so, and the 28th Amendment would overturn that decision. And the other way to do it is under Article 5 of the Constitution. Instead of having 3/4 of the state ratify a constitutional amendment, you can call a constitutional convention, and if you want to institute term limits, that's almost what you have to do, because
they'll never do it.
Yeah, they'll never do it. So that's what got me interested in Article 5 convention, and we could put this in there as well.
Well, I have failed on my homework because I'm a big supporter of Article 5, and if I'd known you were a supporter of Article 5, I would have made this point right up front. But absolutely, the way around Congress in proposing amendments is the Article 5 convention. But you still have to have the states ratify it, and you still, I would say, the state conventions should ratify it.
But it's an article all by itself. There's not that many articles.
That's right. That's
Article 1 is Congress 2 is the judiciary, is three is the judiciary.
So that's a great addition. So this is an extra credit point we got there for the Article 5 convention. So I'm extremely excited that I don't think we have any fundamental disagreements here. And I am grateful for the questions from the audience, which I think brought out the full contours of the agreement about fundamental reform. And so thank you so much, Olivia, for helping to organize this and going forward.
Thank you all. Thank you all.